Hello, Geography and Tourism Studies 2P21 students. This is the first of probably somewhere between 6 and 9 mini lectures I will produce about Peterborough. In this particular mini lecture, so the week 1 mini lecture, I will talk about, first of all, where is Peterborough, Ontario, and then secondly, why should you care? Geography and tourism studies are both disciplines. That means that they are groups of scholars who investigate particular things of interest to either geographers or researchers in tourism studies. And one of the ways that geographers and tourism studies scholars investigate things in their disciplines are by conducting field work. Field work involves going to a particular location and collecting data firsthand. So this might involve, if you were a physical geographer, collecting data from a rain gauge or sampling along a transect to collect soil samples for later tests of pH and sort of the composition of these soils, both chemically as well as in terms of this proportion of sand, clay, and so on. Or in the case of human geographers, so for instance, transportation geographers might be going out into the field and literally counting the number of cars at a stop sign or at a stoplight throughout the day to get a sense of traffic patterns. It could also involve watching and recording how many people jaywalk, for instance. So those might be some examples of how to conduct field work in human geography. And in human geography and in tourism studies, surveys, and so that means the distribution of questionnaires, so or some people call them survey questionnaires, to individuals in the field. Sometimes that happens through the post or through telephone as well, but sometimes people will go and stand on a street corner or along a beach and distribute surveys. And then another common way that in geography and tourism studies people conduct field work is to go and interview people. So you set up an interview beforehand with people who might be able to inform, to provide data to analyze to help answer your research question, and you go and interview them using an interview guide. The key point here is that field work involves going somewhere else and then collecting data while you are there. One way that you can think about these mini lectures on Peterborough are that they are helping you develop your mental map of Peterborough. That is important because you will be conducting field work next year, assuming you take 3P56 or 3P57 in the 2021-22 school year. You will be conducting field work in Peterborough. So part of what I want to do in this course is not only teach you sort of the basics of writing a research proposal, so developing a plan to conduct research, but your particular research proposal is going to be focused on something that could be investigated in Peterborough. And to help you develop a better sense of what is and is not in Peterborough, I am providing these mini lectures. So it might be that you're from Peterborough and everything you hear on here in these mini lectures is old hat, so it's things that you know before. If that's the case, you should let me know and suggest some other interesting things about Peterborough. in the surrounding area in Peterborough County that might also be worthy of a Peterborough mini lecture. I would greatly appreciate that. Likewise, if you have some familiarity with Peterborough, but you don't actually live there, but you maybe vacation there or whoever knows what, you might want to let me know about the kinds of activities that you've done there or things that you thought were interesting about Peterborough, especially if we don't cover these in the mini lectures, because that gives me ideas for more content for next time I teach this course to help people develop a better mental map, so a better understanding of what is in Peterborough and the kinds of research opportunities that provides them. And if we think then in terms of the sort of learning objectives of these Peterborough mini lectures, there are, I believe, 3. So the first is, by the end of this course, I want you to develop a mental map of Peterborough. So in Geography 1F90 and in some other geography courses as well, people will frequently be introduced to the concept of a mental map. A mental map, remember, or if you don't know, is your understanding of where things are in a particular location and what things are found there, as well as the relative position or location or importance of those various things in that place. So in these mini lectures, I'm assuming you have limited in-person familiarity with Peterborough, Ontario. And so by developing your mental map of Peterborough, this should help reduce your anxiety. Not only, or I guess the first kind of anxiety this should reduce is it should reduce anxiety this semester about or as you write your 2P21 research proposal, because you'll be learning a bit about Peterborough as you go along to help you attach new things that you learn about Peterborough or about research design that you can then think about the context in which you might use this information. So it should help you developing your mental map of Peterborough this semester, should also help you feel less stressed about your research proposal that you will be due on the 8th of December 2020. This should also, in the developing of your mental map around or of Peterborough, should also reduce your anxiety next year in 3P56 or 3P57 when you conduct fieldwork in Peterborough as well, because you'll have at least some general sense of where things are and what is located there. So it won't be as alien as it might otherwise be if we just threw you into the deep end and said, voila, here you are in Peterborough. At least this way you'll have had some brief introduction to Peterborough. And the reason that you should care about this, so the reason that you should develop your mental map of Peterborough is that in doing so, that should reduce your anxiety both about this research proposal, but also the research proposal for 2P21, but it should also reduce your anxiety next year in 3P56 or 3P57, and where you actually will be conducting field work in Peterborough. And the importance of reducing your anxiety is that lower anxiety, the lower your anxiety, the easier it is to learn, at least up to a point. We actually want people to be a little bit anxious when they're learning, but not too anxious. But certainly high anxiety hinders learning, because then people enter into something called an amygdala hijack, in which your flight or fight response takes over, and then you are pretty much unable to think very clearly or think in terms of long-term problem solving. So we want to avoid that. So by developing your mental map of Peterborough, that should reduce your anxiety in this course and in next year as well. So what is a mental map? Let's go over that again and perhaps in a little more detail. So a mental map is one's collection of opinions about and experiences in a particular place. And actually, your mental map will normally consist of many more places that you've never visited than places that you have visited. However, the places that you have visited, what you know about those places, the sort of details that you can fill in about those places that you have visited, those details tend to be much more kind of complex or dense. And places that you haven't been to, you tend to have kind of a hazier mental map. You know less about those places. So a mental map does not usually capture actual distances or positions, at least for most people. If you're a person who habitually understands location in terms of like how many steps it takes me to get from here to there, or how long it takes to drive from here to there, then your mental map might actually do a reasonable job of capturing actual distances and positions as well. So often when people draw their mental maps, they don't entirely reflect, I suppose, naive understandings of objective reality. And to reiterate, mental maps can include places one knows about but has never physically visited, such as a mental map of the world, right? I've never been to Antarctica or Arctica or Mexico beyond Tijuana, but I know a little bit about these places. I think I probably know more about Mexico than I know about either the Arctic or the Antarctic, but I still know something about these places, even though I've never actually visited them, right? So there's also a connection between mental maps and sense of place. So this sense of place is another concept that often gets talked about in human geography courses, especially in 1F90, but I think it also makes its way into tourism studies. So our mental maps often or usually include frequently visited and personally important places. So I have not been to where I went to high school between 1983 and 1987. I've not been there since probably 1987. Yet I still have fairly clear memories of that place, and in particular the layout of this large bunker-like structure that housed about 1,200 students. So I still have a sense of where many of the rooms were located, that it had 1, 2, 3 levels, like the internal architecture, the external sort of topology or landscape around that high school. It's still burnt into my memory, partially because that was an important place in my formative years, because I spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours there, correct? Right. So there are places in your life, like, I don't know, maybe your bedroom or your neighborhood or the bus route that you take every day or the road that you drive every day or a series of airports that you have to connect flights through that will burn themselves into your memory. There might also be particular places where you have had important things happen, like many people can remember the first place that they ever had sex. That's often burnt into their mental map. So these are the kinds of things, these kind of important emotional events, or often things seen as kind of as highlights or perhaps rites of passage, will often figure prominently into mental maps, and they relate to our sense of place. And so sense of place informs our mental maps, and mental maps inform our sense of place. So there's this sort of recursive relation here. They kind of feed into each other. And so our sense of place is this mix of positive and negative feelings and memories we have about a place. So it could be that if you grew up in a place that you absolutely loathed and wanted to get away from, that you have a strong sense of place about it, but they tend to be fairly negative. Your feelings about that place are fairly negative. Your memories about it might be fairly negative, and that sort of acts to repel you. Or you might have a positive sense of place about a particular location. And what I hope is that when you conduct your 3P56 or 3P57 fieldwork next year, your familiarity with Peterborough will make your fieldwork a more positive and enriching experience. So one way this can happen, and I've sometimes seen this when I was at your age in backpacking in Europe, and I would meet people who had tour books, and they would talk about, they were going to visit the Eiffel Tower, for instance, or the Palace of Versailles, or the Reichstag, or the Sejm in Poland, or these different sorts of historical structures that either meant something to them personally because they were history buffs, or they just felt like they should go to these places, or, in the case of the Sejm in Poland, that's the parliament in Poland, that I would meet people whose grandparents were Polish immigrants to the United States, and they were going back. The grandchildren were traveling and wanted to see what they called the old country, what it was like, and in particular, its new democratic structures that had emerged in the early 1990s. So your mental map is often associated with your positive or negative feelings or your sense of place about particular locations, right? Where is Peterborough? So this magical place that you'll go and visit next year or whenever you take 3P56 and 3P57. Peterborough is located here where the red dot is, and let me turn on something so you can see a little marker. So Peterborough is there, and it is surrounded by the county of Peterborough. So there's the city of Peterborough, the county of Peterborough, and by the way, here I'm using Google Maps, and it is north of Lake Ontario. So here's Lake Ontario down there. It is north, south, east, west. It is west of Kingston. So Kingston's over there. And it is a bit, if we think in terms of, there's north is up there, right? So that's north, that's south. It's supposed to be an S. South, east, and west. Then Peterborough is northeast of Oshawa. So there's Peterborough up here. It's northeast of Oshawa, a major manufacturing city still, dominated largely, I believe, still by GM, though not as it had been, say, 20 or 30 years ago. And then Oshawa is interesting because it is the eastern edge of the GTA, so the Greater Toronto Area, which roughly speaking comes down to even encompass Hamilton. Some people might even say bits of Grimsby in the Niagara region. So there we've got Toronto, here we've got Hamilton, and so Peterborough is relatively close to the GTA, So let me write that in here, GTA, which is where some large number of you probably actually live. And because it's close to the GTA, and because it's on, or the Kawartha Lakes run through here, and it's generally viewed as a fairly beautiful place to go visit in the summertime, its current economy has become increasingly dominated by tourism activity, in which people from the GTA and other parts of Canada as well, but especially the GTA, will rent cabins or cottages. So for people that are new to Canada, so I'm a new Canadian. I've only lived here about 15 years. And one of the strangest things was to hear people talk about cottages that they would go visit in the summertime. So I've noticed that a lot of like white Canadians of English or Welsh or Scottish descent will often have some sort of family experience where they go rent a cottage somewhere and hang out in the woods. And this might be a cottage that's been in their family for some number of generations, or it might just be a cottage that they rent. And evidently, cottages can range from everything from, I've heard people say, a glorified shed in the bush to quite expensive and extravagant sites of rest and recreation. Anyway, there's supposed to be a large number of cottages in this area. So that means that as a human geographer and as a tourism studies student, if you're interested in economic geography or urban geography or the tourism economy, that there tends to be a lot of opportunities for research, because lots of people that visit cottages will then go into Peterborough to for the day to visit museums or buy groceries and things like that. At the same time, as a result of people moving into Peterborough, there has allegedly been some degree of gentrification. I'm not sure how widespread that is. And we've also seen, in some cases, people, for instance, artists, moving out of the GTA into Peterborough because rents are cheaper here in Peterborough, but then they're still able to take their art into the GTA and visit galleries there and sell their art. For those of you who have not been to Brock as a campus yet, so Brock is located down here where this star is. And so this is where Brock University is. So whenever you eventually come to Brock, and if you decide to live in Niagara, then you'll be located down here. And the distance from Brock to Peterborough, I've heard by bus, is like 4.5 hours. So Peterborough is the place where you will do field work for 3P56 and 3P57. And in my course here in 2P21, I want you to be familiar with Peterborough because you're going to write a research proposal to conduct research either in Peterborough or around Peterborough. And in following weeks, I'll talk about various features of Peterborough and the surrounding region. So for physical geographers, the area north of Peterborough tends to be where the Canadian Shield begins. And to the south of it, you have much more kind of glacial deposits. Likewise, there's lots of eskers and moraines, so as well as nature preserves. So for all of the people up in 2P21, there should be something for you to investigate either in or around Peterborough. And if you have questions about that, feel free to contact me. But I think at this point, we will call it a day. Wait! If you are from Peterborough or have some familiarity with Peterborough and you would like to suggest topics you would like to know a bit more about, I'm open to attempting to create more mini lectures on those. I will be producing somewhere between like 6 and 9 mini lectures on Peterborough, so it's possible that what you're interested in will already be covered, but just in case you have something you'd like to know a bit more about for Peterborough, let me know and I'll see if I can come up with a bit of a mini lecture to help sort of round out your mental map in that domain of knowledge. I will talk to you later.